Lee opened. Daniel Reyes checked the clock on his dashboard for the fourth time in 10 minutes, 7:42 a.m. The interview was at 9 sharp. Lee opened, and the drive from his apartment in East Tulsa to the glass tower of Halden Industries usually took 55 minutes if the traffic on the interstate behaved itself. He'd pressed his only good shirt himself at 6 that morning. Lee opened, standing over the ironing board in the kitchen while Mia ate cereal at the counter, her feet swinging because they still didn't reach the floor. "You look like a real businessman, Daddy," she'd said, syrup on her chin. Lee opened. "I need to look like one today, baby girl." He'd knelt down to fix her hair before the bus came. He hadn't told her how important. Lee opened. He hadn't told her that his savings account had $1,100 left in it, or that the electric bill was 2 weeks overdue, or that if this interview didn't work out, he didn't know what came after it. Lee opened. Mia didn't need to carry that. Enough grief for a person 3 times her age. Enough you're a deti supervisor at Ashland Machine Works for 9 years. Good hours, decent pay. Lee opened. Work he was proud of. Then the plant closed with 6 weeks' notice, swallowed by a merger nobody at his level ever saw coming. 6 months of applications since then. 6 months of "we'll be in touch" that never came. Lee opened. This one felt different. A friend from the old plant had gotten him the referral, an operations management position at Halden Industries, one of the largest manufacturing and technology companies in the country. Lee opened. It paid more than Daniel had ever made in his life. It would fix everything: the bills, the fear that woke him up at 3 a.m., the look on Mia's face when she asked if they'd have to move again. He merged onto the interstate. Lee opened, sun already hard and white in the summer sky, and allowed himself, just for a moment, to hope. That was when he saw the car. It was pulled onto the shoulder about 2 miles ahead. Lee opened, hazards blinking weakly in the heat shimmer rising off the asphalt. The kind Daniel had only ever seen in dealership windows. As he got closer, he saw a woman standing beside it. Lee opened, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun, the other holding a phone to her ear. Every instinct in Daniel's body told him to keep driving. He had 58 minutes. Lee opened. He had no room for anything that wasn't getting to that boardroom on time, dressed clean, composed, ready. He kept driving for about 4 seconds past her. Then he saw her drop the phone to her side, shoulders sagging. Lee opened, the particular posture of somebody who has just been told there's nothing anybody can do. He street 90 minutes. He remembered what that felt like. Stranded, nobody coming. Daniel eased off the gas. "Come on, man." Lee opened. He muttered to himself, already flipping his blinker on. He pulled onto the shoulder 30 yards ahead of her and got out. "Ma'am, you need to..." She turned, and Daniel registered distantly. Lee opened, tailored exhausted in a way that didn't match her clothes. Dark hair, pulled back. Not... Sardi's, may loose. Early 30s, maybe. Composed even now. Lee opened, even stranded. "I have somewhere I need to be very badly, and I don't think I can wait that long." What's it doing? Nothing. It just died. No warning lights, nothing. Lee opened. She hesitated, sizing him up the way anyone would size up a stranger on a highway shoulder. "You know cars, 9 years running a machine shop floor. I know engines pretty well." He was already walking toward the hood. Lee opened. "Mind if I take a look?" She popped the latch. It took him 4 minutes to find it. Met a corroded battery terminal, vibration loosened, barely making contact. The kind of thing that looked catastrophic and was actually nothing. Lee opened, if you had the right hands and knew where to look. He didn't have proper tools, but he had a mole in his glove box and enough scrap wire from an old kit he kept for exactly this kind of situation. This might take a minute. Lee opened. He told her, already rolling up his sleeve. He didn't check the clock. He told himself he wouldn't, and then he did anyway. Once, and something when he saw the time, and felt something in his chest tighten when he saw the time. Lee opened. 31 minutes left before he needed to be walking through Halden's front doors, and he was 40 minutes from downtown at best. Kept working anyway. His hands turned black with grease and road grime. Lee opened. At one point he lay half beneath the front of the car to reach the corroded mount and felt the oil-slicked undercarriage leave a long dark stripe down his shirt. The shirt he'd pressed that morning while Mia ate her cereal. He opened, he heard the fabric catch on something and tear at the shoulder seam. He didn't stop. "You really don't have to do all this," the woman said, crouching beside him now, watching his hands work. "I can call someone else." He opened. 90 minutes in this heat, ma'am. No thank you." Almost there. 38 minutes after he'd pulled over, the engine turned over clean. The woman exhaled something that sounded like disbelief. He opened. "You just saved me an entire morning." Daniel stood, wiping his hands on a rag from his trunk that did almost nothing. Looked it down at Elf, grease down his shirt front, a torn shoulder, dark smudges on his slacks. He opened, his hands stained black in the creases. He looked, he thought grimly, like exactly what he used to be, a machine shop supervisor, not what he needed to look like in 19 minutes. "Glad I could help," he said, and mentally opened even as his stomach dropped through the floor of the world. I'd like to thank you properly, Daniel." Daniel Reyes. He was already moving back toward his car. "You have a good one, ma'am. Drive safe." He opened. He didn't wait for her name. He didn't have time. He was already doing math in his head. 19 minutes, 40 minutes of highway, a shirt that looked like it had been dragged behind a truck. He opened. He was going to lose the only chance he had left. He arrived at Halden Industries 51 minutes late. The building rose out of downtown Tulsa, in curved glass and brushed steel. He opened, the kind of headquarters that made a person feel smaller, just walking toward the doors. Daniel pushed through the revolving entrance with grease still under his fingernails. He opened, his torn shirt sleeve pinned awkwardly with a binder clip he'd found in the glove box, and felt every eye in the lobby land on him at once. The receptionist's expression didn't so much change as freeze. "Can I help you?" He opened. Her tone made clear she doubted it. "Daniel Reyes. I have a 9 a.m. interview for the operation manager." She glanced at a clock that read scheduled for 9. She glanced at a clock that read 9:51. He opened. "I'll see if anyone's still available." He sat where she pointed near two other men in press suits, ties knotted perfectly, portfolios resting on their knees. Both candidates, both clearly here for something else. He opened, judging by how their eyes moved over him, his shirt, his hands, the grease he could still smell on himself. "Tough morning?" one of them said, not quite hiding his smile as he said it to the other man rather than to Daniel. He opened. Daniel said nothing. He thought Mia of the $1,100, of the engine turning over clean under his hands, and he made himself sit up straight anyway. A young HR officer appeared a few minutes later. He opened, looking at Daniel the way you'd look at a bill somebody forgot to clean up. "Mr. Reyes, this way, please. I have to say, the committee doesn't usually accommodate candidates who arrive." She paused. He opened, visibly deciding how to phrase it. "I understand. I had a situation on the highway I couldn't ignore. I'm sorry for the delay." She didn't answer. She just walked him toward the elevator. He opened, and Daniel caught his reflection in the polished doors. A man who looked like he'd crawled out from beneath a car, about to walk into the most important meeting of his life. He thought about turning around. He opened. He thought about it seriously for one full step before he remembered Mia's voice that morning. "You look like a real businessman, Daddy." He straightened his collar as best he could and stepped into the elevator. He opened. The executive floor was a hush of quiet efficiency. A long table with people, 6 seated around it, folders open, pens in hand. Every head turned as Daniel walked in. He opened. He saw the reaction ripple across the table before anyone spoke a word. Actually leaned back in his chair, arms folding, his face settling into something between disbelief and disdain. "Mr. Reyes." He opened. The man's voice 2 minutes late. "I confess I expected some kind of emergency. I didn't expect." His eyes moved down Daniel's ruined shirt. "There was an emergency, sir. Not mine." He opened. Her car had died on the shoulder on the interstate, and roadside assistance told her 90 minutes. I couldn't leave her out there. Silence. Somewhere down the table, Lee opened, not quite hiding a look, exchanged with the person beside them. Daniel could read it plainly enough. "Nice story. That's commendable," the executive said. Lee opened, in the tone of a man who did not believe a word of it. "But I have to ask you directly, Mr. Reyes. Do you understand what a position like this requires? Composure, professionalism." Lee opened, "The ability to represent this company in front of clients, partners, room, home, and you've walked into this room looking like it came off a shop floor." "I did come off a shop floor once, sir. 9 years of it." Lee opened, "I know how to fix what's broken, and I know how to show up when someone needs something." Daniel kept his face steady, though his hands, still faintly stained, were shaking at his sides. Lee opened, "I understand if that costs me this interview. I'd make the same choice again." Nobody said anything for a long moment. Daniel became aware of the sound of his own heartbeat, of Mia's face in his mind. Lee opened, of $1,100 and an overdue electric bill and 6 months of silence from every company he'd applied to. And then the door at the far end of the boardroom opened. Lee opened. Every person at the table rose to their feet at once. A reflex, immediate and absolute, that isn't taught, it's trained by years of hierarchy. Daniel turned to see who commanded that kind of instant reaction. Lee opened. His stomach dropped for the second time that morning. It was her. The woman from the highway. Hair repinned, blazer straightened. Lee opened, but unmistakably the same car 40 minutes into his interview window, watching his hands work beneath the hood. "Mems Halden," the senior executive said, straightening his jacket. Lee opened. "We didn't expect you to join this round." "I wasn't planning to," Elena Halden said, her eyes finding Daniel's across the room and staying there, "until I heard the name of the candidate who was 51 minutes late." Lee opened. The room went utterly silent. "Mr. Reyes," she said, and there was something warm underneath the composure now, something that hadn't been in the boardroom a moment ago. Lee opened. "Would you like to explain to the committee why you're covered in grease? Or should I?" "Founder and CEO of Halden Industries." Yes, his throat tightened, a small, almost private smile. Lee opened. "I'd have introduced myself properly on the highway, but I was a little occupied being stranded in 90-degree heat, and the man who stopped to help me was in a hurry to get somewhere. I didn't think to ask where." Lee opened and saw exactly who I was interviewing at 9 o'clock. The senior executive's face had gone the color of old Perber. "Ms. Halden, I had no idea if said had gone the color of Daniel." "No," she said, still looking at Daniel. Lee opened. "None of you did. You looked at a man grease on his shirt and decided everything you needed to know about him in about 4 seconds. I looked at the same man on the side of a highway, with no cameras, no committee." Lee opened, "and nothing to gain, and he spent sure a stranger wasn't stuck alone in the heat. Making NYC." She turned finally to the table. "I'd like everyone to sit with that comparison for a moment." Lee opened. Nobody spoke. "Mr. Reyes told me his name and drove away before to even thank him properly," she continued. "I have spent 11 years building this company on one principle above every other." Lee opened. Character reveals itself in the moments nobody is being paid to perform for. I don't think I've ever seen it demonstrated more clearly than I did this morning. The interview that followed lasted 40 minutes. Lee opened, though it hardly felt like an interview at all. Elena asked about his 9 years at Ashland Machine Works, about the systems he'd built, the crews he'd led. Lee opened, the plant closure that had cost him a job he'd been good at through no fault of his own. She asked about Mia. Daniel found himself answering honestly. Lee opened, all the fear and exhaustion of finally finding somewhere safe to land. Near the end, the senior executive, who'd spoken first, cleared his throat. "Mr. Reyes, I owe you an apology." Lee opened. "I judged you the moment you walked through that door, and I hope you'll accept that. I appreciate you saying so, and meant it." Elena closed in front of her. Elena closed the folder in front of her. Lee opened. "The operations management role is yours if you want it, Mr. Reyes. But I'd like to offer you something more than that." Lee opened. "We've needed a director for our new field operation division for months. Someone who understands machinery from the floor up. I think this morning already answered whether you're qualified." "I think this morning already answered whether you're qualified." Lee opened. Daniel sat very still, certain for a moment he'd misheard her. Director, he acted immediately if you accept. He thought absurdly of the torn shirt sleeve pinned with a binder clip, opened, of the grease still faintly staining his hands, of how close he'd come to driving highway with his eyes fixed only on the clock. I accept, he said. Thank you. Truly. Lee opened. He called Mia from the parking garage before he'd even reached his car, his cracking on the first word. Daddy? Are you okay? Baby girl, I got the job. He had to stop and breathe before he could keep talking. Lee opened. I got a better job than I even asked for. There was a beat of silence on the line, and then a sound that made his eyes burn. His daughter, 8 years old, Lee opened, screaming to hold the phone away from his ear, laughing and crying at the same time. I knew it, she said, once she could talk again. I knew you'd get it, Daddy. You always help people. Lee opened. Good things happen to people who help people. Daniel stood in the parking garage of Halden Industries, grease still on his hands, his ruined shirt hanging off one torn shoulder, and let himself believe, Lee opened, for the first time in 6 months, that his daughter was right. Some interviews are won in a boardroom. His had been won on the side of a highway 40 minutes before it even started. In the one moment nobody was watching, Lee opened, and the only person who was the one whose opinion turned out to matter most.